This week on the Dawg Show, we're going to talk about the Georgia Bulldogs versus the Missouri Tigers. So grab you a cold beverage and let's go. So the world's largest outdoor cocktail party is in the books, and the Bulldogs won that one 43-20. The Bulldogs moved to 8-0 overall, 5-0 in SEC play after taking down Florida and covering the minus 14-point spread and the over of 49.5. Gary Danielson finally had something worth saying about Georgia. He was talking about Georgia's rankings and was asked, who has Georgia beaten? Talking about strength of schedule. And he replied, everyone. But you still suck, Gary, and I really hope you don't have to cover this week's game, but we know you will because it's a 3:30 CBS game. So real quick before we get into the Georgia-Florida game.
Beatdown.
The beatdown, as we like to call that. So this game, has always been at the neutral site ever since 1933. The game's under contract through 2024 and 2025. But during 2026 and 2027 seasons, they're going to renovate that stadium, the Everbank Stadium. So this annual rivalry game, with the exception of 1994 and 1995 seasons, it's been played at the same place. And during that renovation time, they actually went to what we suggested last week on the show, where they play in the team's respective stadiums, right?
Home and home.
Right. They haven't chose a venue yet. They haven't figured out what they're going to do. Some of the possibilities they're talking about is Atlanta, Orlando, or Miami. Again, we kind of told how we felt. So this past game, the two teams both made around $4.5 million for playing in Jacksonville. Each team receives $1.25 million up front from the city, and then they split the ticket sales, which is usually around $3.3 million each. So
wow,
it's a big money game. It's a big money game for the city, and it's a big money game for both teams. So, that's kind of why I guess they'll continue to play it in a neutral place if they can, because
money rules the world, baby.
Right. So,
I guarantee you, if they played it anywhere else, they wouldn't resod the field on Monday prior to the game. I don't know if any of you guys saw the aerial shots of the field, but there were stripes going up and down the field from the lines in the sod where they had just resodded the field 5 days prior to game day. And one of the Florida linebackers, their best linebacker, comes in during warm-ups and twists an ankle.
Yeah, tweaks his ankle. I thought it was going to be a huge storybook of the game, the way it started out pregame, showing the guy tweaking his ankle, and then you could literally see the sidelines all over the field, but that ended up not being the case, thankfully, at least for Georgia or Florida. You didn't really see anybody get injured or any issues with the turf, but it looked like it could be a much bigger story than it ended up being.
Let's talk about the big bright star of this game, though. Of course it was Carson Beck because he crushed it, but what about my main man, all 185 soaking wet pounds of Lad McConkey, coming in with 6 receptions for 135 yards, a touchdown, and just absolutely balling, and definitely making up for the fact that he was his boy Brock Bowers wasn't there to help him out as supporting cast.
So yeah. Carson Beck has now thrown 250 plus yards in each of his first 8 games. This is the longest streak in SEC history. Kellen Mond was the closest. He did it for Texas A&M in his first 7 games. I think that was the 2020 season, 2019 maybe? I
don't know. Kellen Mond played 7 years of college football. So
well, and he wasn't even on the COVID program, was he? But the only other quarterback that was even close had 3 years in a row. So Carson Beck's definitely on a tear. We mentioned last week, we're kind of frustrated that he's not being talked about in the Heisman race, but I think if he keeps up that pace, they're not going to help but not talk about him, Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton on the depth chart with both running backs having strong games. The pair combined for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. I thought this game served to keep a lot of the naysayers at bay. When you got Gary Danielson actually saying good stuff about Georgia, it's time, It's time for them to shut up and get on board because we're not stopping, boys. All right, so we got the number 1 ranked and undefeated Georgia Bulldogs going to host the number 14 Missouri Tigers in Athens, Georgia this week. Missouri's coming off a bye week. They enter the game with a 7-1 record. Their lone loss coming against LSU. This is a 3:30 game on CBS in Stanford Stadium. Weather is forecasted to be about 62 degrees and sunny. And Missouri's coming off a 34-12 win over South Carolina, where they pretty much controlled that game from start to finish. So Saturday's the first of 3 games against ranked teams for Georgia. So they got Ole Miss and Tennessee coming up. So, the big thing is for us to be able to get in there, control this game, and stay healthy. We've been battling injuries all year. So I think if we can get through this, and not get banged up and just give the other next two teams up, any chance of making some headway, I think that'd be great. Georgia ranks 4th in passing, 6th in scoring, 7th in scoring defense. Tigers are top 30 nationally in passing and scoring. The line is Georgia favored by 15.5 points. Over and
it's
under.
actually moved to 16. Yep.
And the over and under is 54.5 points.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing to see this game at 3:30. I would have preferred a night game at 7:30. Would have been a little bit more loud and raucous with the beer flowing all day as opposed to just half a day. But should be an exciting crowd. It's going to be 93,000 fans just screaming and yelling. Hopefully we can get about 8 or 10 offside penalties like we got versus Tennessee last year and keep them on their heels quick and early and just take over the game like we did last week.
Well, Brady Cook's coming to town, and he's had those Missouri Tigers on a roll. They got one blemish on the record this year, and that's a loss to LSU. They hung in there for a long time, and their defense just couldn't hold up to that high-powered LSU offense. But, Brady Cook's rolling in, over 2,200 yards passing, 15 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. They're not to be taken lightly. Like, he's legit, and this Missouri team is legit. They're physical. They're tough. They're going to play hard. They're going to play hard defense. But the difference in this year and last year is that they're playing between the hedges. So Georgia's going to have that home field advantage. The crowd's going to be live because it's going to be really the first real big game of the year at home in Athens.
Yeah, this is a huge game. It's going to decide the SEC East most likely. Dogs are going to have their hands filled with this Missouri team. Cook and Beck have very, very similar numbers on the year. As Chris mentioned, about 2,200, 2,400 for Beck, 15 TDs, 3 interceptions for Cook, and 14 TDs, 4 interceptions for Beck.
All right, so I pulled the injury report for this week. We know Brock Bowers with the ankle is still out. He was with the team down in Florida. Branson Robinson's still out with a knee. So C.J. Allen, he was injured during the Florida game with a hamstring. He's questionable and day-to-day. Dan Jackson with the knee is questionable. Roderick Robinson with the ankle. He dressed out for Florida but did not play. He's still listed as questionable. Amarius Mims is listed as questionable. He dressed out for Florida but did not play. All right, so Amarius Mims with the ankle is questionable. He did dress out for Florida but did not play. Xavier Truss was back in last week during Florida. Tyron Ingram Dawkins, he's probable with a foot injury. And then Darius Smith is not with the team at the moment. He's focusing on academics and doing some conditioning. So I'm sure there's more to the story. That's probably the politically correct answer that we're getting right now on that.
So as I mentioned, Missouri's offense is led by Brady Cook, and he's legit. And I think one guy that we don't hear enough talk about is their running back, Cody Schrader. Cody Schrader's coming in this game, 807 yards on the season, 9 touchdowns, but this kid's averaging almost 6 yards a carry. On top of that, he's not afraid to catch the ball out of the backfield, averaging another 5 or 6 yards a pass. Seemed like a dual threat running back. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little concerned about how Georgia starts this game. They've been a little slow to start, and this offense right here, I just don't want to give them that momentum. This Missouri offense has enough players and enough skill that it'll be harder to stuff that momentum if they come out with a drive like Florida did. Florida came out, a couple long passing plays, first drive. They got 7 points on the board, and of course, Georgia just absolutely blanketed any attempts of them to have an offense for the next 2.5 quarters. But I don't think that we're going to have the luxury of doing that with this Missouri team. I think we got to come out and play hard out of the gate and try to really, really stifle them and shut them down and set the tone at home and not give them any momentum to get started with.
They did the same thing against Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
They just let them come down that first possession. And, they had a crossing route across the middle. Now, the difference was the Vanderbilt one was about a 40-yard run after he caught it. Florida was a little bit further down the field. but it was still the same thing, you know. And then they took a moment, you know, they did adjustments or whatever, and they didn't do that anymore. But I agree. I don't think they can do that against Missouri.
Not against a good team that's going to play good, hard-nosed defense, which I do think this Georgia offense is potent. I think we've got too many weapons. If you're a defensive coordinator and you're trying to figure out how to cover the number of just absolute weapons that this Georgia offense has, you can't focus on any one person. You got 4 or 5 receivers, you got multiple running backs, and then on top of that, Carson Beck throwing it over 70% completion rate. I don't know how you plan for that, but they're going to have to be ready. And I think this Georgia offense is going to come out and do their thing. I think they're going to score high 30s, probably close to 40 points. And Missouri, I see them probably getting into that low 20s mark. But I hope Georgia handles it pretty good and moves on and does their thing. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, should be a hell of a ball game. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs. All right, guys. Well, that's our show for the week. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please remember to subscribe and to like, and go Dogs.